Hey there, guys. So I want to thank you for taking the time to check out today's video. As always, I do really appreciate you guys and your support, and of course, just sharing your comments and your thoughts on everything that I've shared over these past few months, over this past year, and of course, have continued to support my approach to building my business and my fitness journey in general. I really do appreciate it. I'm really passionate about of course, what I share, and it does mean a lot. And I can't thank you guys enough for all of that support. So, as always, I wanted to do another video as I usually do each week. I try to make a weekly video where I focus on talking about various different topics related to being LGBTQ and how that can be, of course, a hard journey, but it also can be a very insightful and rewarding journey at the same time. So I recorded this video a little bit sooner than I normally do because tomorrow will be a little bit busy for me today, or excuse me, tomorrow will be a little bit busier than, of course, today. So I decided to go ahead and record it and, of course, share it with you guys beforehand so that I have a new video that you guys can check out. So this is a topic that I've sort of ruminated on. And again, like each week, I usually have something that comes to mind that I want to discuss or that I want to really dive into. And the reason why I want to talk about these topics is so that it becomes relatable, especially if anybody comes across my video who is, really struggling with their journey. So that's why I share these. Even if you're very comfortable with your journey, that's totally fine, of course, but my main focus is to resonate as much with anybody who is struggling at the moment and who is trying to find that peace within themselves. So, what I wanted to go over today is I wanted to go over basically how I knew I was gay. How did that come into a realization? How did I come to that realization, that I was gay? So this is a story that there's a lot of different points that I can go over here, and there's a lot of different, key indicators that I could talk about. And I think there's some funny parts in this too. But I think everybody comes to the realization at many different points. I've As I've discussed before, I always enjoy listening to stories, especially like coming out stories or documentaries that discuss somebody's experience with being gay. Like I've said before, one of my favorite books is Prayers for Bobby, and Boy Erased is another one, which I do have with me. I actually had them in California, those books, and I brought them back when I came back to Tennessee. So I've had those to read, and I've been reading them, of course, like pretty much every night over the past few weeks. But the reason why I really enjoy those books is because they do tell real stories. Like those are not fictional stories, they are real stories of what, you know, what what they've went through, what these guys have went through, and what they've had to sort of overcome. Even though I know in Prayers for Bobby, it does have a really sad ending, it's still very much a real story. And I think it still has such a huge impact. And Boy Erased is basically about conversion therapy. That's basically the whole sort of story in itself and what the author went through to, when he was younger, going through this process of conversion therapy. And so I have this really, really big connection with watching, specific documentaries or just reading those books that tell very real stories of being gay, especially, if, like the stories, a lot of the stories come from the South usually, and kind of in the same area that I'm from. And so there's just something about those stories. Of course, it connects with my own journey in a lot of ways. And I think it does resonate with a lot of other people too. But I, I think that this in itself, again, going back to the topic itself, is that I had a lot of different, notions when I was younger. Like I've told you guys before, whenever I was 13 was basically the official point that I had actually come out. Even though over the years I've had many different cycles of going in and out of the closet, when I was 13 was the first time I actually came out. And of course, that was to my parents, and then also to my best friend when I was in middle school. But even before then, I started to think back, when I was younger, a little bit younger than that. And there are some points that I remember in my, I guess you would say, more formative years, or just the years when I was really young, where there were like these little indicators that I had sort of found out that I was a little bit unique and different. Which, like I've mentioned to you guys before, I'd always been a very shy kid. I'd always been very quiet. Of still kind of that way in a lot of ways, but I was always somebody who liked to observe things. I'm very much an observer and just to watch people. And one of the things that, I guess, to go back to some of the experience when I was younger, one of the key things that I remember, I do remember this is a very common experience, and I think I shared this in one video before, but this is a very common experience with a lot of gay men, where when they are very young and they, go to the store, with their parents or whatever, and they go to the underwear aisle and they, kind of stare at the men in the underwear packages. I remember doing that when I was younger. I remember I used to go to the grocery store with my mom all the time. I was around my mom quite a bit when I was younger. And I do remember going with her, shopping in places like that. And I do remember like kind of standing there in the underwear aisle. And again, when you're younger, it doesn't really click to you. You're just too young to understand what it is that, why you are attracted to something. You don't understand it. So it's just this sort of thing in your mind, and you're like, why is this appealing? It's kind of that when you're younger. And so I do remember that many times at Walmart that I'd had that sort of, you know, situation where I would stare at those packages. Another story. So whenever I had to be in elementary school. I know that I couldn't have been in middle school when this happened, but there is one really, really funny thing that happened whenever I was again, I think it was in elementary school. I still remember this. I was probably maybe 9 or 10. I may have been, a little bit younger, maybe somewhere in that time frame. But like you guys know, I play a lot of video games. I grew up around video games. There's a lot of, I guess, really positive memories and sort of that nostalgia, I guess you could say, that I have from video games, which is why I collect video games. If you know anything about me, that's a big thing with me. I love collecting things. And as you can see behind me, that's just a thing with me. I really enjoy, the aspect of, you know, just physical media and things of that nature. But I know I'm going off track there. But video games were a big thing with me when I was younger, and they still are to this day. And one of the games that I used to play a lot, and I still would say that this is my favorite video game of all time, And I remember playing it many times when I was younger. And that is The Sims. So if you're not aware of The Sims, of course, The Sims is basically a simulation game where it's actually, whenever it was first developed, the game itself, the code name for the game when it was in development was called Dollhouse. So basically what The Sims is you create these, I guess you would call, you create Sims, and they're basically people that you put into these houses. You build houses for them, you put them in the neighborhood, you have them communicate with other Sims. It's basically like simulating life, in other words. But it is basically like a dollhouse because you are basically telling these Sims what to do. They're going to work. You're basically following their lives, in other words. And this is a game I played a ton when I was younger. I played it whenever, and again, the game came out in 99, 2000, and I played it on the PC when I was younger. And I remember my parents they had bought me a few expansion packs and just different versions of the game because I love this game. I think the games that I played the most when I was younger was both Grand Theft Auto and The Sims. But The Sims was something that I think I had spent the most time on. But in The Sims, I'd had different versions of the game, but I remember that I had The Sims on the PlayStation 2, and I still have the same copy of the game. And there was a version of the game called The Sims Busting Out that I had. And in this game, there was like basically a career mode. I know if you're not familiar with video games, this is kind of confusing, but basically, there's a mode that you would play in the game where you would try to go from rags to riches with your Sims. So you would have them try to go up the ladder in their career and try to get to like the biggest mansion in the neighborhood. That was kind of the whole like specific mode that you played. And so one of the big benefits of trying to progress in the game was to have relationships with as many Sims as possible, whether that be romantic relationships or whether that be friendships. And so I had my Sim, I had my Sim, he was a man, and I had him with other women, and then I had him with other men. So it was technically, so The Sims is very open ended, it's never restricted. So one of the positive things with The Sims is that it was always very forward thinking in that you could have gay characters in the games, even like back in 99 and 2000. And of course, it was controversial back then because you could do that in the game. But that was one of the first games that really allowed you to kind of have, it may not have been exactly the first, but it was one of the ones that allowed you to kind of have a romantic relationship, as far as like a same sex romantic relationship in a game. And so I remember I had my character, it was basically a bisexual character, in other words. This is basically what it was. But I remember that, I remember there was one day whenever I had went to my mom, and I was younger. I still remember this day. I remember I went to my mom and I told her that I had my sim, like my sim who was a guy, kiss another guy. And I just remember going to her and telling her that. And it didn't go well, of course. But I remember vividly going to my mom and tell her that my guy sim character kissed another guy in the game. And I just remember her being upset about that. And I think I remember her saying, that's wrong and this and that. I don't think they took the game away from me. But I do remember that did happen in the game, and whenever I was playing it, and of course I was younger, so I didn't really, I guess you'd say I didn't really understand what was the big deal. I didn't really understand it, but I just remember telling her that, and it's one memory that I will never forget. I've always remembered that when I was younger. And so I think too that's why that game kind of resonates with me. And not only me, I did not realize, but until later, that a lot of gay, like LGBTQ individuals have had a lot of positive memories playing The Sims. Like it's a very, I guess you could say, a gay friendly game because it's so open ended and you can live your life however you want to in that game. And so I think that game really became an escape for a lot of people. And I didn't realize that, but I played that game nonstop when I was younger. I remember playing it like crazy, and I still play it to this day. I don't play it as much, but it's still a game that I have very positive memories about. And that's why if you see my collection in there, I always have like a collection of The Sims, all like basically from 1 to 4, because there's been 4 official games in the series. And so that's why it's always been a game that I've always resonated with. But that was another indicator. I know I kind of went off on a tangent there, but that was another indicator when I knew that something was different about me. I remember another story that I'd had whenever I was also with my friend. And I remember looking at, there was a character in a game that I played. I know I'm going back to video games again, but it's crazy because you do notice certain things when you're younger. When you look back and you kind of think about, okay, yeah, that makes sense. There's a character in a game called Resident Evil. I'm sure you guys may have heard of Resident Evil. Um, but it was Resident Evil 4, and it was Leon from that game. He was basically the main character in that game. And I remember coming across, I was going to try to draw basically a drawing of that character without a shirt on. I remember doing that. I remember trying to draw that, and I was going to give it to my friend, and I never really thought about it how I really was like attracted to, like I remember finding the picture online because there a lot of people make fan art. So I had went and tried to find a picture of him without a shirt on. Of course it doesn't happen in the game, but there was like a fan art and I was going to try to draw it. And I just remember like I was really attracted to this drawing and this fan art or whatever. And again, it was just one of those other indicators. There's a lot of different things, small little things that I remember like that some of the mannerisms and some of the ways that I acted with a lot of things, how I did sort of notice that I was a little bit different in a lot of ways. And again, even if you're somebody too who has a lot of different mannerisms, that don't necessarily mean anything, but I think that it can sort of allude to who you are and your personality, and you know and who you are as a person itself. So again, I think it's interesting to kind of look back and to think, okay, all of these different things that happen and these little memories that kind of stick with you. And that's how that memory was with me, whether it be some of the things I did when I was younger and just, coming of age, as I was going into middle school and high school, and then really finding out what it is that I am. But that's pretty much all I wanted to discuss in this video, guys. I really do appreciate your time and just taking the time to listen, to watch, however way you actually, watch these videos. I do really appreciate it. And again, guys, if there's any topic you would like me to go over in the future or discuss, feel free to let me know. I always enjoy these topics. I think, again, in a lot of ways, I think it does help out a lot of people. I think it helps you. I think it's important to sort of discover yourself and really take time to think about, how you can find that acceptance in yourself. I guess for lack of a better term, but I really appreciate you guys. I will have another video, of course, in the next week. I do plan on going to Nashville Pride tomorrow, and hopefully I'll have some pictures together and maybe do some videos. I know that I was going to do a video when I went to West Hollywood, but there was just so much stuff going on. It was just like just a lot for me to take in at that time, so I didn't really have that mindset to record everything. But I'm going to try to record tomorrow what I can and share it with you guys. But thank you guys once again. And again, I really appreciate your time. And I will see you guys in the next video.